What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. Right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founder of RX Bars, the founder of P90X, Tony Horton. He talked about, Rabbi, that he made money as a street mime. So before he sold millions of dollars of P90X, he actually put his head on the street, and that's how he made his food and rent money, is as a street performer. The founder of Atari, Nolan Bushnell, talked about how when he was Steve Jobs' mentor, Steve offered Nolan 33% of Apple for $50,000 and why he said no. And there's many more cool episodes. Check them out at inspiredinsider.com. The episode today is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. And our mission is to connect you with your best referral partners and clients. And we do that through our done-for-you podcast solution, which is like a Swiss Army knife for your business. It serves as a vehicle for strategic partnerships, referral marketing, content marketing. I've met my business partner and some of my best friends through it. I believe if you have a business, you should have a podcast, period. But it's more personal to me because it's not just about your business. It's about you leaving a legacy for yourself and for the guests that you feature. And it's really inspired by my grandfather, who is a Holocaust survivor, and he and his brother were in concentration camps in Nazi Germany and were the only members of their family to survive. And his words and legacy live on because of an interview the Holocaust Foundation did with him, which you can watch on my About page, which really inspires me. So yes, podcasting will help your business, but it really helps you and your guests leave a legacy. So I personally credit to the best thing I've done for my business and my life. If you have questions, you want to launch your own podcast, you can email us anytime, support at rise25media.com. We're happy to answer any questions that you have. Today, I'm very excited. I have Rabbi Mois Navon, founding engineer at Mobileye, and much more. But I first heard about Mois because my dad, Alan Weiss, went on an organized trip with Rabbi David Began. Shout out to his website, l'chaimcenter.org. And he came back raving about the talk that you gave, Mois. And just a little background about Mois is his professional experience in the research and development of digital hardware spans over 35 years. He's worked for IBM, NASA's JPL, News Corporation's NDS, and Mobileye, where he holds several patents in the field of image processing and computing hardware. He lectures often on the elements underpinning what makes Israel the startup nation. And he gives a great talk. I suggest anyone check it out on YouTube. He helped create the chip that is powering the autonomous revolution. It's the chip that Intel bought for $15.3 billion. And as I was driving in today, Mo, I was thinking, the 0.3 is $300 million. Just the decimal of that is $300 million. So it's pretty remarkable. And he talks about his journey. His story is the Mobileye story. He talks about his story is the startup nation story, and his story is the story of the Jewish people, as he talks about in the talk. So, Moz, thank you so much for taking the time, late night Israel time, to do this.
No problem.
There's two things.
Small correction. So I mean, my name is a little bit funny for Americans to say. It's really Moise, like
Moise.
Okay. Most of my friends that I grew up with called me Mo. And in Israel, they try to call me Moshe, but which is my Jewish name. But since I had this difficult name all my life, so that's what I keep.
Was Moise your original given name? Because you were born in the U.S.
Moise is, it's basically my grandfather's name. It's a typically, Sephardic, like kicked out of Spain name. Right. My family spoke Ladino, or they were of those people that were kicked out 500 years ago and brought in by Suleiman the Magnificent and brought into the Ottoman Empire.
So there's two things from Moise that I discovered from doing research about you. Okay. One is you're a glutton for punishment. Okay. So you went from startup to startup to startup, and now I realize you're getting a PhD. Like, where does it stop? The second is your wife must be a saint, And I say that because, we'll talk about this, but I don't know her, but it sounds like she was just, through reading a lot of stuff and listening to a lot of stuff, she was just so pushing you forward and just supportive on whatever you both wanted to do, which is getting to Israel, and with no questions asked, right?
So yeah, that's true. I mean, I suppose you could look at my desire to constantly try to actualize myself as a glutton for punishment, but I can't sit still. That I find is punishing, and I always am trying to look for goals, and I'm always trying to figure out some new goal and try and pour myself into it. Becoming religious was one of those goals. Moving to Israel, becoming an engineer, working for startups, becoming a rabbi. I mean, I did my rabbinical learning basically on the side while I was designing the chip for Mobileye for 16 years. So 6 of those years I went 2 nights a week, for every single week. If I missed, I listened to the recordings. I never missed a class basically. Coming from where I was coming from, I remember when my wife also, as you mentioned, that obviously my wife must be a saint, and you're correct, because there's no way I could do this without her.
Right.
And she's always seen the goals that I was interested in and pushed me to do them. Getting smicha was one of them. And I remember she was always cutting out ads. Look, there's this program, there's that program, and I kept saying, no, these are not good. Finally, she found this program at Merkaz Harav, where it said, strong yeshiva background required. And I don't have a strong yeshiva background, but I have a lot of motivation. And so basically I came home from class every night, and I sat up for hours with an Aramaic Hebrew dictionary, translating into Hebrew and then translating into English. And then I basically, in order to be able to study the whole Isur v'Heter, I translated all the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, all the commentaries, basically wrote them in English so that I could review them again. So, it's a lot of effort, but it's also a lot of reward.
I want you to give a quick timeline, just so people understand. I've done a lot of research, but just so if you could do a quick timeline of, okay, college and just the different positions that you had quickly through college, and then we'll go back through. But
okay, so while I was studying computer engineering at UCLA, in my second year, I got a student internship at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I did that all through college. After college, I worked for a couple of small companies, and then I got married shortly thereafter. We came to Israel and did like a year of traveling yeshiva, and that was the first time I ever came to Israel. And so on the one hand, it was like, really interesting and new, and you see this new country, but my wife and I were all the time trying to assess, like, how are we going to live here? So there was a lot of stress in going through and traveling around. It wasn't like we were just sightseeing. We were like house seeing, home seeing. Anyway, then we went back to LA. I worked for a company called Aura that had a lot of defense contracts. That's when I built this missile system. Basically, it was part of Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, that shooting missiles against missiles in space. I did that for a couple of years, and then that's when we decided to move back to Israel. We already had kids, and we realized that we really need to move our family before the kids are in the school system. That makes it very difficult. So we had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. We came to Haifa, and I worked for IBM. IBM was a great place to work for in terms of technology, but a terrible place to live in terms of, like, American religious person in Haifa in 1992 was very, very difficult. So I left there after a year, came to Jerusalem, worked for a startup that went under like in a couple of months, but got me to Jerusalem. Worked for another startup in Herzliya Pituach, where I did video on demand systems, the first video on demand for airplanes. And and that also was a great job. But the driving Jerusalem Herzliya is also very, very difficult. So that's when I moved to a place in Har Chotzvim in Jerusalem called NDS, News Data Systems, which was later bought out by Cisco. And there I did encryption, decryption systems, basically systems that do pay TV, pay per view, pay for whatever it is, right? You know that if you paid, you get your channels decrypted. And then that takes us to the year 2000, when I tried to find a startup in the internet boom, and I was making a fiber to the home networking system. And that also went under because basically all of the internet went under at that time, basically the year 2000, 2001. And I still didn't give up on my startup goal of trying to work for someone.
You can't be beaten down. You can't be beaten down.
Right. And so that's when I stumbled upon this little startup that was doing something in the automotive industry. I said, okay, internet people are not buying, but cars people still will need to buy. And so I went and worked for them, and 16 years later, they were bought by Intel for $15.3 billion.
So there was a point in that journey, and we'll go back, but where someone told you, hold your breath, and they were telling to hold your breath for how long at that point? And talk about what they were referencing.
Okay, so when I was hired by Mobileye, so, it's a startup, and they gave me options, and they cut my salary, and he said, hold your breath, don't worry, we're going to have an exit in 2 years. I understand that I'm not, I'm putting some pressure on your lifestyle. Basically, I had to pull my kids out of all of their extracurricular activities, stop inviting people over for Shabbat, stop going out completely, don't buy anything, right? And so, okay, fine. So, 2 years, okay, we'll hang in there. And then 2 years became 3 years, and 3 years became 4 years. And then it became a big joke in my house, like, so when is this exit going to happen? And, every year the CEO would always get up in the company dinner and say, exit in 2 years. And he did that for 16 years.
I mean, it's funny, but it's really not funny in a sense. Looking back, it's funny, but when you have to go back to your wife and kids and tell them we have to pull you out of the extracurricular activities, what's that like? Right.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And that's another thing that you have to give my wife credit for. It's not only that, she got behind me in all these crazy goals that I try to fulfill, but also, it's biting the bullet literally, and just saying, okay, we're going to try this startup thing and see how it goes, and everybody knows that the startup, the percentages of startups that actually make it, is very small. And the numbers that make it like Mobileye are, 1 in a million.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted you to lay that out because it's a tattered journey. This is not, it's an overnight success after 35 years or whatever number of years, right? And you had to sacrifice a lot to get to where you were.
Also, look, when I moved to Israel, we basically cut our salary in half. And, the cost of living doesn't make that up. You're basically, biting the bullet again. And that was done with just because we said we want to live in Israel. And that's right. It's not so simple. I remember somebody after the Mobileye exit, somebody came up to me and said, wow, overnight success. And I said, overnight and 16 years, but yeah.
Right.
Because all of a sudden people hear about it.
It's the first time they heard about it. Exactly. And so, and we'll get to this. You had a realization when you were 7, about life and death and some profound questions you're talking about, which kind of relates to, Israel known as a startup nation. But there were a couple defining moments when I was listening to your journey a little bit, which is one, when your wife just said, let's move to Israel. And you're like, well, okay, I don't have a job, and seemed like she didn't care. And the other one, which I love this story, is is the interview you had at the airport. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, because that to me was it started the trajectory, essentially.
Right. So, I mean, okay, I'll tell basically the interview was that I met the head of the chip design group of IBM, whose name is Aaron. Aaron, he's actually the head of the Israel Innovation Association today. At the time, he was also a professor of computer technology or computer science at the Technion. And he had taken a 1-year sabbatical. He was coming to San Francisco to work in Silicon Valley for a year. And so they said, you'll go meet him in the San Francisco airport and you'll have a technical interview and we'll see if we want you to work at IBM. And so it sounded really great. You know, I'm going to the VIP lounge of the San Francisco airport, meet the head of the chip design group, right? I really made it. And all of a sudden, you know, they're playing Monday Night Football. People are getting drunk. There's music in the background. This guy's asking me finals questions from his computer science class at the Technion. And so, you know, I'm like, I was having a hard time. It's just, you know, he's giving me little hints and I'm giving him little answers. And, you know, basically I would say that I failed. And he said, thank you very much. And I folded up my stuff and I left. And then when I got to the door of the San Francisco VIP lounge, so I said to myself, I mean, this just can't be happening. I can't have just blown my chance to get to Israel. So I went back and he was sitting on the couch still. And I said, listen, you know what I don't know, but you don't know what I do know. And I explained to him a lot of, I mean, I had my whole briefcase full of all kinds of, you know, schematics and drawings, diagrams, and my design work for the past at least 5-10 years. And so I explained to him everything and he said, okay, thank you very much. And I left. And then, you know, I got a call a week later from the head of IBM that they want to give me a job. I think that, you know, that's the kind of sort of tenacity that you have to have. And you know, we believe in hishtadlut, right? I mean, I definitely think that it was the hand of God, but I think that the hand of God, you know, you have to like follow it and you have to do something about it. And God doesn't help those who don't help themselves. And I don't know. I think maybe, I don't know. I attribute a lot of it maybe to sports. You know, I did a lot of competitive sports and when I was a kid and in high school. I mean, I'm not like, you know, Mr. Super Athlete, but I did do a lot of sports. And I think that sort of influences you on like, you know, you know, don't let go and keep fighting till you win.
Yeah. I mean, you got to the door and you thought, no, that's not the outcome I want. I'm going back. And you said, I showed them everything that I had worked on, but just talk a little about everything. I mean, everything is an understatement. Like you mentioned a couple things you're designing. Like what were some of the things that you walked him through?
Yeah. I mean, so the main project that I had worked on at that time was this IRSP, the infrared scene projector, which is basically the missile testing system when you want to shoot a missile at another missile. So you need to be able to test that before you go around shooting missiles into space and miss.
I would hope so.
Right. So basically what you need to do is develop a simulator. A simulator is basically a movie screen of a missile going by. And then you put the camera that's going to be on the American missile and you see how it follows this Russian missile going by on the screen. So that sounds simple enough. We all know how to play a movie on a screen, but missiles aren't working in the visual spectrum. They're heat-seeking missiles. So you need to basically make a movie player that's playing in heat. So you have to paint a picture with laser beams. And okay, so then the system starts getting to be a little more complicated.
And there was other things though at that point in your career that you had done, right?
I don't know what are you referring to? I mean, I worked on a laser printer. I worked on laser diodes. At JPL, we worked on the first automated pap smear tester, where you basically, instead of doctors having to look at cells under microscopes, it's all done automated, which takes a lot of image processing and then basically does a yes, no, maybe, and the doctors look at the maybes.
And, there was another portion where I don't know if you realize this was going to be a bigger vision, a bigger company when the CEO came in, and I don't know if it was a CEO or founder, and gave a speech, but it wasn't the same old speech.
Yeah. So you're basically referring to the story of when Mobileye sort of did its a pivot, what we would say, that basically Mobileye was set up as a company doing image processing. We were trying to make an application called ACC, Adaptive Cruise Control. It basically sees the car in front of you and it adjusts your speed to the car in front of you. And then it was taking too long for that system to get into cars, to get integrated. And so we came up with another product that we would be able to sell to the market, immediately. And that was this sort of warning system, which is pretty well known in Israel and slowly getting known in the rest of the world, where you have a camera looking out your front windshield and it detects cars and people in lanes, and it beeps you if you're going to crash, or it beeps you if you leave your lane without signaling. And we basically did this aftermarket product. I mean, you can put it in your car after the market, after it's been sold. And really it was an afterthought. We're just trying to make some money. But what turned out after analysis by all kinds of consumer products groups and insurance companies was that we were literally saving lives, that we were changing the way people were driving. We were helping people drive better. And so the CEO won this one company dinner. So he basically, instead of getting up and usually giving the general CEO speech that CEOs get up, a little pep talk for the workers, he got up and he was very serious and he said, we're saving lives. And that really changed the whole direction of the company. And that's when we became an ADAS company, Advanced Driving Assistance Systems, where, instead of warning the driver you're going to crash, we put on the brakes. Instead of warning you that you're leaving your lane, we keep you in your lane. And so all of those kinds of applications have really become the bread and butter of Mobileye, and to this day. And then really there was based on all of those applications together that we got into the autonomous vehicle world as well. But really what's fueling automotive safety as well as the income of the company are the ADAS systems.
So how do you think, the chip will affect, and you give some really good talks out there on ethics, right?
Yeah.
How do you think it will affect other industries?
You're asking two questions here, because there's one, there's the technology how it will affect, and the other is the morality and the ethics that go into all these kinds of things. So, look, there's a lot of advanced image processing that's being done, and I'm sure there's other applications. And Mobileye is focused on the automotive world, but there's definitely other robotic applications and where these kinds of things can be of use. So there's definitely going to be spillover from in the technology world. Also, the chip itself is really a super duper image processor, which allows you to do all kinds of computation intensive algorithms. And so those things can apply in different places. We'll see how that plays out. The other question is really what's very interesting is the ethics, because what's happened now, I wrote a paper which hopefully will be published soon in a book on AI, which is ethical dilemmas like the trolley problem. So everybody's pretty much familiar with the trolley problem. There's a trolley running down a track. It doesn't have its brakes, and it has to choose between going straight and hitting 5 people or changing the lane and killing 1 person. So these kinds of dilemmas have been around, well, at least since Philippa Foot wrote it in 1967. But these kinds of ethical dilemmas have been used in ethics courses, and they push people into corners and get you to try to think in ways that you might not have thought before. It's not that, lots of times when I give this talk, so they say, oh, well, why don't you just yell out at the people? Or why don't you just turn the other way? Or, and so you have to explain that the dilemma is not that you can get out of it. There could be a dilemma where somebody's going to die. Now what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to try to save everybody as much as you can and all that. But what if you can't? What if there is a case that somebody's going to die, 5 against 1, or, whatever, all kinds of different possible dilemmas. And so these dilemmas are very interesting on an academic level. But now autonomous vehicles have made them very real. I'm not saying there aren't other real applications. There are. But this has become, a huge, huge topic. I mean, if you Google, trolley problem autonomous vehicle, you'll get like 1 million hits of like significant stuff. And so it's definitely been an interesting journey. I mean, like I said, I wrote a whole paper on it, and there's a lot of people working on it. I think that it's important that what it really does is tell you that, technology is not enough for the world to be a better place, and that there's also this whole realm of ethics. And so that's something which is huge, and this is just one little example, and that in robotics in general and AI in general, there's lots of ethical questions. I mean, the trolley problem is very pertinent for autonomous vehicles, but this is what you mentioned that I'm working on my PhD. So the thesis of the PhD is the moral status of artificial intelligence. So this is another huge topic that people are talking about, and that is what happens when a robot gets to the level that you can't even tell if you're talking to me, a person, or me, a robot. And so now, what's the moral status of this thing? Is it a machine, or is it have some kind of personhood? Or is it really just like a person? And I can show you today already ethicists that pick their place along the spectrum. There's a professor in America who says, what do you think you are? You're just artificial intelligence out of meat. So there's no difference between you and a robot that's artificial intelligence out of silicon. And then there's other people that don't go that far, but they still say a robot has personhood. And I read an article by a guy who said that, a robot can get married and has a marriage certificate. And so these are huge questions that technology is bringing to bear and really cannot answer. Ethics has to answer this.
It's a slippery slope, right?
Excuse me?
It's a slippery slope. Like there's a lot of gray along the path.
Exactly. And so, I mean, there's a couple of points that I hope to make in my thesis. And one of them is that no, you're not artificial intelligence out of meat. And that, we believe that there is something about a human being which is different than a smart machine, no matter how smart it is. And so that's one of the things that I would like to try to demonstrate philosophically. And then the other is, the implications. So that if there is a difference between people and machines, so then how do you deal with them? And, there's a case to be made. Somebody, one of the articles that I was reading talked about that, okay, even if we agree that there's a difference between people and robots, you may still ethically need to relate to robots as people, because if you don't, you may end up relating to people as machines. Right? And so it starts to become very interesting. And now this is really only one aspect that I'm trying to narrow my field. There's a huge, huge aspect about how do you ethically program these things. Isaac Asimov many, many years ago wrote these 3 rules of robotics that, they shouldn't hurt anybody, right? And okay, but now everybody understands that's not enough to define the ethics of how these things act. Now, I'm not even touching that. That's also a huge, huge, huge field about, how do we define what a robot does? And that's another thing which there's a lot of fear that these things are, if it's artificial intelligence, they learn on their own. And then all of a sudden they learn to take over the world and we're in the Matrix.
That's why they're going to make a movie of you, Mois. I feel like I was a movie unfolded in the journey. So what do you think that little thing is? You mentioned there's something that's different between humans and robots. There's some little thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So religious people like me will call it a soul. Okay. That there's some spirituality. But even not religious people, they call it consciousness. Okay. And there's a huge question among secular ethicists, not religious people, not Jewish people, okay, that what exactly is consciousness? And there's a gap between, we know exactly how your brain works and all the neurons and the synapses exploding, and we can map everything. And, we know exactly, what happened so that you can see that this car is red. Okay, but now I program the Mobileye chip, and I can also tell that I'm looking at a red car. But my computer chip that sees the red car just says, okay, red car, right? Now what? But when you see a red car, you're like, wow, I want that. I like that car.
You have
right?
some emotions around it, yeah.
Exactly. And so what is that? What is that little gap we still haven't been able to find? There's a famous philosopher whose name is David Chalmers, and he wrote an article several years ago called The Hard Problem of Consciousness. And that's the hard problem. We still can't define it, and we still can't figure out, we can't map it. And so, there is room to say, at least today, that's that distinction between man and machine. But that, these are things that need to be worked out.
There's no easy answer. But what are some of the other stuff that you talk about that you found in your research that you talk about in the moral status of artificial intelligence?
So like I said, I'm really just at the very beginning of my research, but there's a lot of questions of trying to parallel this to animals, that animals are sentient and that robots may become sentient, and then, if something can feel or sense or experience pain, so then they're a higher level than just a machine. And then in Judaism, so there's a level of objects, right? You're not allowed to destroy objects, and you have to pay for it, and et cetera, and replace it and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the level of animals, that you're not supposed to harm animals for no good reason. And there's, all the ethics and halacha of that. And then there's people, right? So then it's going to be interesting to see, like, where do robots map into all of this?
It's interesting just to hear your thoughts, because you just started this PhD, but you've been thinking about this stuff and in this industry for 35 years. And so, you mentioned this stuff spilling over, this technology spilling over in other things. What do you think to you, this is like normal everyday life. You've been living this. You could see these things clearly. For most people, even sometimes thinking of an autonomous vehicle is groundbreaking, right? So where do you think this will spill over? The technology, besides cars, you mentioned it may spill over into other aspects of society.
Look, what I was saying was that, okay, there's a lot of technology that's driving this. There's the image processing aspects. There's the data collection that's going on. There's the AI itself. There's the hardware supporting AI. AI had a big kick, I think, in like the late 80s, that, everybody got really excited about it, but then it died because there wasn't the underlying hardware to support the kinds of calculations that you needed to be able to do. The reason that AI is actually having a resurgence now, this isn't new, this is a resurgence of an old dream, is because the hardware has now been able to support it. So the kinds of chips and technology that we're working at Mobileye, and there are other people that are also working on it, are enabling AI to be applied to all kinds of other places and applications. Robotics is for sure one of them. An autonomous vehicle is just a very specific application of robotics. There's all kinds of things that can be done. But what I found more interesting, and what we were just talking about, I think is important to emphasize, is that, I love technology and I love science, but I also love Torah, morals, ethics. And I think that there's really a confluence, and that people have to understand that you can't have one without the other. And that, I think that's the story of the Tower of Babel, right? That these people learned how to burn bricks. This was a huge technological advancement, okay? And then they built a tower, okay? The tower was basically saying, we don't need ethics. go away. Look, we can get to the sky. We can define. We don't need any God. But so then they ended up killing each other. Okay. And they ended up just basically breaking the breakdown of society. And so I think that that's an amazing metaphor for the need of the confluence between technology, which there's no question is a great thing that has improved the lives of humanity and continues to do so, but it also needs to stay in check with ethics and with philosophy. And so it's not that there's these two different realms and there's these people that sit in this box and they don't. No, the two are very much together. And that's, well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, that's what we call Torah umada, right? It's Torah and science. And science is very general. It's all these things that are promoting life that are outside of ethics and halacha, Jewish law, and so forth.
It was interesting how you kind of concluded your one of your ethics talks that I watched, and I felt like I need some closure or conclusion to it. I'm left hanging, but the reality is I don't know if there really is an answer, but you kind of broke down all the factors that go into creating a technology and making decisions, right? There's government, but the funny thing is the way you broke it down is you have the coder who coded it, but that person just wants to, code it in the least amount of code possible. Right. And like, I just want to get home to my kids. Do you really want the person who's going to just want to get home to their kids and finish the code quickly, determining if you should veer this way or this way?
Right. So basically what you're referring to is at the end of my discussion about how do we make a decision of who's going to die in the trolley problem. So I bring a lot of different opinions and different ways to try to solve that problem. And then I say, so then who really gets to make that decision? And so what I was trying to say there is that, it's not necessarily like some people would think. It's the people that are directly involved, the programmer or the technology provider or the automobile provider, or, there's all these layers of people who are very directly involved in the development of the technology. And I want to say that, no, those people are technologists. Those people are business people. Those people have an agenda. And that, again, emphasizes why you do need ethicists and you do need people outside that are able to come and look at things objectively and provide ethical guidance. And so, there's definitely there's a need for this confluence between these two very different worlds.
I feel like when people talk about autonomous vehicles, there's an argument that people bring up, and if there's someone in the middle of the road and you're on a cliff, you've heard it, and to avoid the people, you veer off the cliff and don't kill the three people, and then you get killed as the driver. And right. You're talking about that and saying, is that really going to happen right. in general? But do you want a car that's basically going to kill you over killing three other people?
Correct. So that's another huge topic that people talk about, that say, okay, fine. At the end of the day, let's say that ethically, we come to the conclusion that the driver has to die. We did all the calculations, and the fair, right, just thing is that the driver dies. But so now you may not be able to sell a car like that. And
it's not a good tagline.
They did surveys. They said, would you like to have an autonomous vehicle that reduced car accidents by 99%? It's going to save the world. And everybody says, of course, great. And they said, would you buy that car if you were the person that would have to die? And everybody says, no, right? I don't want. So then the question becomes, okay, so then now, if no one will buy this car, so now we're still killing thousands of people a day on the roads, and so maybe we have to forego that. And so these are, again, I still see these as kind of technical questions that are theoretical almost, because like I said, the odds that such a situation is going to come to be that there's 3,400 people dying on the roads every day today with people driving. And so the sooner that we can get people off or let's say away from the steering wheel, right, we're going to start saving lives. And so again, these kinds of questions are really interesting theoretically, and they do need to be applied. But then, the number of cases that in the case of the trolley problem, it's pretty minimal.
So, Moise, I want to go back to when you were age 7 or 8 and you were thinking of this deep question of you realize at the time people died. And I'd love to explore this, your take on this, because you're a scientist and rabbi in one. What do you think happens after someone dies?
What do I think happens after somebody dies? That's a good question. I mean, obviously I wasn't there, and so I don't know. I believe that there's a sort of there's what Judaism talks about, and there's also what I don't know. There's a book called Life After Life by Raymond Moody. There's lots of people where there's kind of this collective consciousness that talks about a tunnel and the light and relatives and seeing your life and so forth. So yeah, I kind of believe that in general, I think that you're going to get to the other side and you're going to realize that this is a very limited reality that we've been in, and that there's this huge, huge reality out there, and that you're going to have, a review of your life. And I think Aryeh Kaplan talks about this very rationally, and he says that we don't believe in heaven and hell. The hell is sort of the embarrassment of having wasted opportunities, right? And so when you're doing your life review, it's your life, and there's nothing, you're going to see, no one needs to tell you, oh, that was good, or that was a mistake, or that was really not what you should have done. And, but now you're going to be judging yourself. And so obviously it's going to be difficult on those times when we've blown it. And I think also Judaism provides this kind of idea of tshuva on a daily basis, on an annual basis, whenever you can, to say, okay, I realize that wasn't right, and I need to work on that. And so then if you were going to have a life overview, so you would have said, yeah, I realized that already, so it's not a surprise, and I don't have any issues. I dealt with it. And it's the stuff that you didn't deal with. And so I sort of believe in this kind of conventional approach where, like I said, I think it's pretty well rooted in Jewish sources, and it's in popular cultures around the world kind of ascribed to it.
Yeah, there's obviously, I just wanted to hear your take on it. I was really curious. And, as far as why did you, after Mobileye sold, what made you decide to go on and get your PhD in this topic? Because you could do whatever you want. You could join another startup,
right?
if you wanted to torture yourself. But
I'm actually advising a startup just for fun on the side.
Okay.
But, because people approached me, but that wasn't what I'm looking to do. It's interesting and so fine, but really I'm trying to follow my dream of Judaism and philosophy, and so I'm doing Jewish philosophy. And like you mentioned, when I was a little kid and I found out that people die, so that really jolted me, and it jolted me in a way that not that I was afraid or I don't know what. I just was like, okay, so what's the point? What's the point, right? And that's sort of driven me throughout my life. Is that I think about things in a philosophical way, and I'm trying to understand, what are we doing here? And look, I'm not unique in that sense. Viktor Frankl was a famous logotherapist. Said that man is driven by purpose. We all at the end of the day try to find some meaning in our lives, and it depends. You can find meaning in small things. You can find meaning in big things. I try to find the meaning of life.
Yeah. Man's Search for Meaning is definitely one of my favorite books of all time.
Right. It's a very important book.
I mentioned in the beginning, the Mobileye story is the story of the startup nation, which is your story, the story of the Jewish people. Why? And you've had a lot of people from all over the world come and try and figure out, why is Israel known as the startup nation?
Correct.
So what do you tell
What do
people?
I tell people?
Yeah.
Well, look, I try to tell them this story, which is, like you mentioned, it's basically like my story and the Mobileye story and the story of the Jewish people. It's really a story of ups and downs. It's really a story of, like, biting the bullet and continuing to move forward in spite of everything, right? It's being able to, whether it's on a personal level and say, I'm going to cut my salary in half because I find it meaningful to move back to the land of Israel. It's working for a company where, everything is cut to the bare bones, and we're going to fulfill this, on the company level. I mean, we were definitely very proud to be the only company on the face of the earth that was working on this one problem, trying to solve this image processing using basically doing 3D object detection with a single camera. And it's also on the Jewish nation level, where we've definitely had to take hits and hunker down and try to figure out and not convert and not give up and continue to persevere in our beliefs. And so that's really, I think, what the Startup Nation is about. It's about purpose. I mean, there's a famous quote that I bring in the middle of the book that basically, with all of its difficulties, Israel has one commanding advantage: a sense of purpose. And so, somebody once told me, so do you think that, if some startup has purpose, so they're going to make it? I'm like, that's not what I meant. What I meant is that purpose gives you a drive, and it gives you a will to persevere. There's many other factors that make a company successful or not successful, but as an individual, as a corporation, or as a country, if you have goals and you believe in them, so that gives you purpose and that gives you drive, and I think that's really what's fundamental about the Jewish people. There's a great quote from Paul Johnson's book, The History of the Jews, where he talks about that no people has argued as vehemently as the Jews that creation has a purpose.
Talking about startups, like the person in your company said, hold your breath, right? And so there's a lot, like you said, most startups don't succeed. Are there things that you look at, because you've been through failed startups, you've been through obviously a successful one, that someone should just quit, like throw in the towel, like they should not keep fighting and struggling? Are there certain factors that you see, looking back, that if someone is in a startup now, they've been toiling out, they could toil out for 10, 15, 16, 20 years and it not have a successful outcome? What do you look for if you were to invest in a company, let's say, that is asking you to invest a lot of money? Hey, this is what we have. What are you looking at to see, is this going to be successful?
So, I mean, you're asking kind of like two different questions. I mean, there's the one question, like, when should people throw in the towel, versus, what do you look at to see if, it's a worthwhile investment, that, the company has good odds of continuing. Throwing in the towel is something very difficult. And on the startups that I've worked for, the towel was thrown in for you. Right? Most people don't throw in the towel, basically, you're out of money, and that could be for all kinds of reasons. But a couple of the startups went under because of money. One was because they were spending way too much. Everybody was getting new cars and going out to lunch and just thinking, they were burning money. And so they ran out. Okay. So that was mismanagement. The other company I worked for, that was they ran out of money, was basically because they had planned on going to the stock market at the time when the stock market crashed. And so you can't really blame the management, although it would have been better to have more of an initial investment before hiring so many people to do so much work. But so that's one thing. And the other about trying to look for, worthwhile startups. I mean, there's a lot of different factors. Mobileye in hindsight obviously was a great idea because they were bringing new technology, something that nobody ever did or nobody ever even thought could be done, to detect 3D objects with a single camera. Now, that doesn't mean that every good startup is going to have some kind of like scientific breakthrough, but you definitely need some kind of unique technology, and then you need a business model, something that you're like. Mobileye was looking at a huge market, the entire automotive industry, right? To have a chip in every car, that's a lot of chips. And so you want to try to be, in a big market, somewhere where there's a lot of need. I remember my brother made fun of me once. I wrote some little program to do like holiday calculations, and he said, "Oh, there's going to be a lot of people lining up to buy this one." So,
not a big market. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you want to try to focus on a big market, and have some kind of a technological advantage in terms of that you're bringing something new to the market. And then, of course, there's the people and the funding. The people that they have to have some kind of experience within that market and within that field.
Yeah. Moise, first of all, I have one or two last questions, but first of all, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your story. It's truly an inspiration to hear your journey. And so I really appreciate you sharing it, and everyone who listens to it, I think will be inspired also. Before I ask the questions, where should we point people towards to learn more about you, what you're working on the web? Where should we?
I have a website. It's called Divrei Navon, DIVREINAVON. So at divreinavon.com, basically I have like all the papers I've published. I have all kinds of shiurim where I teach people, all kinds of basically, Torah Umada kind of stuff. Trying to integrate what's going on in the world with what we've been learning as a people for 2,000 years.
Yeah. So everyone check it out. There's some fascinating things on there for sure. I've been on there. So the two last questions I always ask, Moise, because it's Inspired Insider, I always ask, what's been a low point, a really low point that you had to push through in the journey? And I'm sure there's a lot of low points. One that sticks out, and then what's been a proud moment for you on the journey? So what's been sticks out to you as especially a low point?
Clearly the lowest point was when one of the startups had fallen through. I didn't have really any idea how it was going to continue. We're here in Israel, and I took my wife out, and we went just to have like a coffee in a hotel lobby in Jerusalem, and I said, we're at the bottom, and I don't know what we're gonna do, and we may have to go back, or I don't know what we're gonna do. And she said, well, we'll make it. We'll do what we have to do. There's times when you really like. I mean, on that same time, I mean, there was actually another time I went to her and I said, that's it. I think we're just going to go back. And she just started crying, and she wouldn't say, she just wouldn't accept it. And we stayed. And,
what do you think gives your wife that perseverance? Like, she just has that same thing time and time again of you getting to the door, be like, no, I'm not leaving without this job. It seems like the whole way through, she's the same way, which is, no, we're going to make it. Nope, we're not leaving. Sorry. Right. What do you think gives her that perseverance?
I don't know. I guess, I guess you have to call it faith. At some point you believe in what you're doing is the right thing. I think my wife has always believed that this is the home of the Jews, and this is where, you know, we're going to make it. And she's had the faith to just say, I don't care, you know, and I don't care if we're poor. And, you know, so we'll just eat more tuna and pasta or whatever it is. And that's that, you know?
Yeah.
And obviously the high point was standing on the New York Stock Exchange holding my wife's hand when they rang the bell that our stock went public after 16 years of biting the bullet.
Yeah. What was going through your head when that happened?
Wow. Just wow. I mean, you know, I can't believe it. And Akol Tova.
Yeah. I see. It's like, I don't know if like that timeline flashed before your eyes at that point. Thank you, Rabbi. I really appreciate it. This was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, I hope other people are inspired like I have been. And this technology is going to save a lot of lives and make a huge difference in the universe. So like that thought you had at age 7, you know, whatever triggered that, thank God, right? Literally, figuratively, for what you've helped create. So thank you
very much.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.